misdemeanors, a British term that didn't have a set definition. In Britain, it was used to describe whatever crime an official was being impeached for.
The framers would leave it up to Congress to determine what amounted to a high crime and misdemeanor, with a few guiding principles. Following the principle of adjustum generis, which asserts that a catch-all phrase includes only things similar to the items that precede it, high crimes and misdemeanors would be actions similar to treason and bribery. Manson Tribe put it all together in the following way. A high crime and misdemeanor involves corruption, betrayal, or an abuse of power that subverts the core tenets of the US governmental system. They require intentional misdeeds, and they are so plainly wrong by current standards that no reasonable official could honestly profess surprise at being impeached. We agree that any act that meets these criteria and violates the trust of the people beyond reparation could be an impeachable offense.
3 presidents have been impeached. None were removed from office. The impeachment power has been threatened many times, but used sparingly by Congress, as removal of a sitting president intervenes in the fundamental principle of popular sovereignty. In Federalist 1, Hamilton contemplated whether men could create good government from reflection and choice, or whether they were forever destined to depend on accident and force for their constitutions. Benjamin Franklin suggested that the English doctrine of impeachment offered a civilized answer to a problem once settled by assassins and revolutions. We should view the impeachment power as a tool to preserve the republic, not a tool for partisan attack. Thank you. We're ready for your questions.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. So my question is about why you think that the framers didn't impose more limits on the presidential pardon power.
I think one of the biggest reasons they didn't do this was because one of the only other options to place limits on the pardon power was to include the legislature in part of it. And a huge anti-federalist fear was that the powers of the executive and the legislative branch would mingle together. And that was, they believed that that would be used as like a partisan issue and wouldn't be used in the best way. So one of their biggest fears was the commingling of powers between Congress and the executive branch.
Judge Anderson, you have.
Why do you, let's talk a little bit about the way the impeachment process is run. The founders, basically excluded the judiciary from any part of the impeachment process, with the exception of the fact that the Chief Justice, with or without stripes on his robe, sits in the Senate on the trial piece. Why did they do that? Why did they cut the judiciary out of the picture?
I think they did this because they knew that the legislative branch gained the trust of the people because they are elected officials, whereas the judiciary branch are appointed officials. And so the best way to check the president, who is also an elected official, would be through a representative government, which would be Congress.
Professor Chambers?
Sure. I'm curious, what should it take to impeach a judge?
I believe.
Could you repeat? Sorry.
You
Could you repeat that question, please?
Sure. What should it take to impeach a judge? Because y'all mentioned what it should take, seemingly what it should take to impeach an executive official, but what should it take to impeach a judge?
I think that what it should take to impeach a judge is probably their violation of the public trust, and any type of impediment on a constitutional officer's, like a judge's, ability to execute their duties correctly. In 1912, Judge Robert Archibald was impeached for using his office to receive financial gains. And I think that because he used his own job as a way to violate the public trust, that he should have been impeached for that. It was a rightful impeachment.
Okay.
I also think that if someone is charged with a serious crime, that should constitute impeachment from a judge. Like in 2009, Samuel B. Kent was impeached from the U.S. District Court in Texas because of charges of sexual assault and impeding on an official proceeding. And I think that was a just impeachment.
Okay. Would that apply also in the with respect to an executive officer, that certain really serious crimes ought to also trigger impeachment?
Yes, I believe so, because when a president or any executive is elected into office, the people put their trust in them, and they trust that they'll do their best to abide, not do their best, that they will abide by the law, because it is their job to execute the law. And I think it's not too much to ask from them.
I agree with Nora, and I also believe that an executive official shouldn't have to commit a crime to be impeached. I think we can see this how you can betray your office without committing a crime. Like if a president were to be in complete dereliction of their duty as president, if a president were to never be in office or never be fulfilling their role as president as intended, then that could be grounds for impeachment, because they're supposed to be representative of the people and listening to the people. And if they're not doing that, that would be not a crime, but it would be leaving the country like hanging.
Do you think that impeachment today works as the framers intended it to work? If not, why not?
I don't believe so. I think that the framers intended this to be for serious convictions. And nowadays it's used more as a partisan attack from either party. We've seen this with the last impeachment of former President Trump, where it had become more of a partisan attack, Democrats versus Republicans, rather than actually being something that a president could be impeached for. So the Democrat Senate were looking to convict former President Trump of incitement, but it's a very high standard to meet. And so it would have been more likely that they could have impeached him on something like trying to interfere with the Georgia election when he called the Secretary of State there and asked them to find votes. That could have been more grounds for impeachment, but because of the January 6th riots on the Capitol, they decided to go down the road of incitement, which didn't work in their favor very much.
Do you think that the framers intended to allow a president to pardon himself or herself? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I definitely do not think so. In the Constitution, it says that the president has the power to grant somebody a pardon. And so the term grant inherently means that there's a grantor and a grantee. So you can't really, just like you can't donate something to yourself, you can't grant something to yourself. So that's why I believe that the framers did not intend for the president to be able to pardon himself.
Is there any language in the text of the pardon clause that precludes the president from pardoning himself or herself?
I don't believe so, but I think it's more just implied in the term that they use, which is grant, to grant somebody a pardon.
Right. So if grant is the language, should the president be able to pardon close family members?
I don't believe so. I believe that's an abuse of the pardon power. We see this with Bill Clinton pardoning his half-brother off of drug trafficking charges, which doesn't make sense for a pardon. It's a very serious crime, and he was in the wrong. So I don't believe he was in the right to be pardoned.
Okay, so is it just the relationship, or is it also the style of crime?
I believe it was because it was his half brother, and I believe that it's a abuse of just because of the blood ties or the family ties.
Okay.
I'm going to have to disagree with Abel here. I think it should be based off of the crime that is committed, because there are situations where somebody is wrongly convicted and a family member has the ability to pardon them for that. So I don't believe it's just based off of family that you shouldn't be able to pardon them, because it is two parties involved. But I do think that it is definitely based off of crime rather than relationship.
Okay. Should the president be able to pardon for violations of state law as well as violations of federal law, do you think?
No, I don't believe so, because if that were true, the president would have to be going through many different cases, which is a lot of work for one person. May I finish my thought?
Yes.
So I think that should be up to people within each state because they can be more connected to whatever person had allegedly committed what crime.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Nicely done. I really appreciate how much work you put into this, and I really appreciate the examples that you gave and your knowledge of sort of the historical basis for both the impeachment and the pardon power. And I'm especially thrilled that you're from my part of the state, which is the only good part of the state. Ham pie. Judge Anderson.
Yes, thank you. Of course, I'm particularly I get all the quiver hearing discussion about it as Judum generis, and we don't often hear about that. Not a big deal, but it was sort of interesting to see that pop up. I thought your response to my question about why the judiciary was almost entirely excluded in the impeachment process was good, and I think accurate. I think you also could have pointed out that the judiciary was widely regarded as the weakest of the three branches, and the founders may not have seen that as a particular good use of the judiciary. I thought the response to the question about limiting pardon power was good. There are controversial pardons, and now we've only heard a couple of groups, but I thought your citation to President Trump's pardoning of Sheriff Arpaio, that's a good example of a controversial pardon. I don't want to get into the details here, but you could see where the argument could be made that that was an abuse of the pardon power, and what do you do about it? And one thing that I think we maybe could have had a little bit more discussion about was it's great to limit the pardon power if you want to try to cut down on controversial pardons. No, there's some constitutional issues there, of course, but then you also limit the ability of the use of the pardon power in controversial cases where the judgment of history perhaps is a little more favorable than current events would suggest. I think of the decision of President Washington to pardon those involved in the Whiskey Rebellion, for example. And there are other more recent controversial ones that look a lot better in the light of history than they do today, than they did at the time. But anyway, I thought it was a strong presentation. I enjoyed being part of your conversation today. Professor Chambers.
And I agree. I think putting pardons and impeachment together is interesting. In some ways, it's a little strange, but it is certainly something that some of the framers put together. The question of where the power comes from does have an effect on what you think the scope is, and I think you did a good job of thinking about where it comes from and where the scope is. It's a tough one because there's a lot of discretion involved, and as a consequence, I think it requires that you all think about what you care about in terms of pardons and impeachment, and a little bit less of what the law requires, because the law is pretty fuzzy on that. And in that vein, it was good to see you all doing some thinking along those lines. I do like some of the examples that y'all pulled out in terms of Judge Archibald and Bill Clinton's brother. I think I suspect that some folks would say, hey, Clinton's impeachment of his brother was perfectly fine. That is to say, the only reason his brother wouldn't have gotten one would have been because he was his brother. But I think there are others who would argue, as Abel did, well, no, you just shouldn't go around impeaching family members. So it's a very, very interesting, and it was a good conversation for us to have, and I appreciate having it.
Thank you.